So let's get rolling. So thanks again for tuning in. My name is Eric Elliott, and I am the Advanced Hunter Education Coordinator with California Department of Fish and Wildlife. So let's introduce our topic and presenter tonight. I'm especially looking forward to this webinar. We've been working hard on it, and I'm just wondering how many of you have actually applied for Bighorn sheep tags. And when the tag results come back, you're just getting tired of the expected not drawn again loser message. That is until the day when you hit the jackpot. That day came a few years ago with someone in my family. My son ended up drawing a tag. And there's more to come on in this webinar about that. So on this cold January night, let's start getting better prepared for that hunt of a lifetime. Tonight, we're going to be learning about this fascinating animal from CDFW's wildlife biologist, Danielle Glass. Danielle has been working in the Bighorn sheep program since 2016. After her presentation, we're going to be talking sheep hunting with a friend of mine, Joe Maslich. Joe is the most experienced sheep hunter I know, and I'm thankful that he's with us tonight. So with that being said, go ahead and take it away, Danielle, and go ahead and let's get rolling with the webinar.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Eric, for that lovely introduction. So today I'm going to be talking to you all a little bit more about desert bighorn sheep in California. And let me slide. Oh, my slides are lagging. Let me just see if I can fix this. Sorry.
It's okay.
Oh, okay. So just wanted to start with a little bit about me. So my name is Danielle Glass. I am the co-lead of California Fish and Wildlife's Desert Bighorn Sheep program. I have worked for the department off and on since 2016, and I am a wildlife scientist. If you want to get really fancy, you can say I'm a systems ecologist, but I am really interested in doing good science and then taking that science and being able to do better management. So I really do want to have a good system for desert bighorn sheep in California. And I just wanted to start out with a quote, since I know you all are hunters, you really want to have a good hunt. And I think this is a good quote that encapsulates that idea. Sheep hunters are romantics who love high places and solitude. To them, the wild ram embodies the mystery and magic of the mountains, the rocky canyons, the snowy peaks, the fragrant alpine meadows, the gray slide rock, the icy dancing rills fed by snowbank and glacier, the sweet clean air of the high places, and the sense of being alone on the top of the world with the eagles, the marmots, the wild sheep themselves. The sheep hunter is willing to climb until his lungs are bursting, to walk until his legs are dead weary, to grow hungry and thirsty for great rewards. There is no halfway. I think that there's a lot of truth about that quote, about how sheep hunting is. It really is one of the hardest hunts. And so just to get everyone's minds working, here's a little find Waldo activity. I'm going to give you about 20 seconds, and this is a picture through a spotting scope, and see how many bighorn sheep you can find. Go.
I think I failed this test last time when I took it with you, Danielle.
Okay. So you might have seen the one in the very center, but there's actually 8 bighorn sheep on this slide, 8 rams. So I think that the message I want to send here is that bighorn sheep hunting is hard. They're hard to spot. There's usually more out there than you think there are. And the general plan of action is, the best as I can tell, is to keep looking, keep glassing, and you will slowly but surely find them. And I just wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page here. So here's a picture. This is a ram or a male sheep. This is a ewe or a female sheep with a cute little tongue. And this is a lamb or a baby sheep. And so just in terms of hunting, for example, this animal, can you hunt it? The answer is no, that's a ewe. Not allowed to hunt it. How about this one? Also a ewe. Please do not shoot it. How about this one? Yes, that's a ram. You can hunt it. And this one? Yes, indeed. That is also a ram. And so California does actually have a very specific regulation about which desert bighorn sheep you can hunt. You can only hunt rams, only hunt the male sheep. And in California, they have to have at least one of their two horns so that the tip of the horn goes past this very particular line that's going from the interior edge of their horn down through the posterior edge of their eye. And at least one of the two horns has to go past that line for that to be a legal ram in California.
A real quick shout out on that past slide. That's a retired California Fish and Wildlife officer, Kent Harrison, that harvested that ram.
Yep.
And I don't know if you're on tonight, but I just plugged that, buddy.
It's a nice ram too. So I just want to give a little introduction to bighorn sheep in general. They were once widely distributed in North America. Early estimates, which are of some debate, estimate that there's between 1 and 2 million sheep. This is particularly true if you read Lewis and Clark's diaries and their trip west. It seems like every other day they're like, we ran into another flock of sheep. They just kept running into bighorn sheep. They were everywhere. Mm. And then, of course, as settlers moved in and the West was explored, that led to some problems for bighorn sheep. There was a lot of hunting of them. A lot of miners and settlers came in and were taking the water and diverting it and making it so it wasn't available to the wildlife. And then also they brought with them livestock. They brought with them domestic sheep. And with that came disease, which is a really big problem for bighorn sheep. The disease might be the decline of the sheep in the Sierra Nevada mountains in California may be attributed to epidemics brought by domestic sheep in the 1870s. So a very long time ago that we don't really have a good documentation of. And so this disease is a real problem for all bighorn sheep across North America. It is a bacteria called Mycoplasma ovinemoniae, and it is found in domestic sheep. It is not a problem for the domestic sheep. They don't get sick from it. But once it gets into bighorn sheep, it can make them sick. It makes them die really quickly. It can wipe out entire herds. And it comes from nose-to-nose contact with domestic sheep. So like in this picture where there's a bighorn sheep among domestic sheep, that is a real problem because that one domestic sheep can get sick, but he can then also go back to his herd and get the pneumonia to kill off his entire herd, the entire population. So it's a real issue. And just to drive home the point here, here's an example in 1988 where there was contact with domestic sheep for the Warner Mountain herd, and there was 100% mortality rate. The entire population was extirpated. So this is a really pretty serious problem. So today there's about 5,000 bighorn sheep in California. They're spread across approximately 70 populations, and they're located in the Sierra Nevada, in the Peninsula Ranges, and then down into the desert. So pretty much the entire of Southern California that is not the coast has bighorn sheep in the mountain ranges. And so here's a picture of what their distribution used to look like in California. And you can see that up north in the northern section of the state, there used to be desert bighorn sheep. Those have been completely eliminated because of disease. And so now the map looks like this, where there's only bighorn sheep in California in the south. And there are two different subspecies. There are Sierra Nevada bighorn sheep, and there are desert bighorn sheep. Sorry, having other troubles. And so I just want to go into those different subspecies a little bit to give you guys some information. The Sierra Nevada bighorn sheep are critically endangered under the Endangered Species Act. There are very, very few of them. In the last estimate, there is about 360. Last winter took about 50% of the population because of that heavy, heavy snow. Mostly they died by avalanches, but really this is a subspecies that is in crisis and has been in crisis for a while, and the state of California is pouring a lot of efforts into trying to bring back this subspecies. And you can see just looking at the picture that they don't look like your normal desert bighorn sheep. They're a little bit whiter, they're a little bit smaller, and their horns are different. So their horns are more splayed. They go out wider than desert bighorn with those very classic desert curl. So you can really, if you're just looking at them, you can tell that they are different than desert sheep. And here's just a map of where they are today. This might be not quite as updated since last winter was such a rough year, but they're all generally on the eastern side of the Sierra. They're not on the western side at all. That's because it's higher up, it's better escape terrain, better habitat for the sheep, and it's really spread out between like Bridgeport and down towards Mount Whitney, which is like Lone Pine. So really they're found in one very specific area of the state. And then desert bighorn sheep, there's actually a very little distinct, what's called a distinct population segment in the Peninsula Ranges. These guys are also considered endangered under the Endangered Species Act. And you can see that they are found in the mountains kind of by San Diego, so south of Palm Springs. And yes, they are not huntable. They also have their own recovery plan. They're doing much better than the Sierra sheep, but they're still also recovering. I think that being closer to, urban areas has definitely had an effect on this population segment. And then there's what we call the other desert bighorn sheep. And these are the ones that I manage. These are the ones that you can hunt. So these are probably the ones that you're most interested in. And as you can see, they are spread throughout, 60-ish mountain ranges throughout the desert regions, the Mojave in California. It is, as someone who has to cover this whole range, a lot of area to cover. But it's been exciting for me being able to hike around some of these areas. And I just want to go into a little bit about the life history of desert bighorn. For me as a biologist, we classify them by age as either lambs, yearlings, or adults. And lambs are pretty easy to tell from adults. You know, they're small, they're cute, they're fuzzy. Yearlings, so those are like 1-year-old sheep. Those ones can get a little bit more tricksy to tell. And so I think that this photo gives a pretty good idea of things to look for. You can see that the one on the right, if you look at its muzzle compared to the adult ewe on the left, is shorter. So having that shorter face really is one dead giveaway that this is a young sheep. And then also, if you look at the horns, the young animal has gray horns, whereas the older ewe has yellow horns. And so you can really look and see what color the horns are to tell the sheep's age. The yearlings will actually have two-tone, two-color horns, where they'll have gray on top and yellow on the bottom because their yellow is coming in. So that's one way you could say that's a 1-year-old, that's a yearling, if it has two-tone horns. And so in California, rams can live to be, 12 to 14 years old. Ewes can live to be 16 to 18 in good circumstance. Just generally, ewes can live to be older than rams. Lamb survival is variable depending on the year, but generally is low compared to adults. And adult survival is relatively constant and high. As you can see from this little figure at the bottom, it's between 90, 80% for annual survival for pretty much their whole lives in California. Though, of course, that, every given year is slightly different depending on the weather. And also just wanted to talk a little bit about seasonal patterns and about how sheep move and live. There in California is a really big distribution depending on where in the state the animal is from. They're from all the way down at the Mexican border up to the White Mountains, which are right next to Bishop, California. And having that range causes a really wide distribution in how those sheep, in the timing of, how those sheep rut and lamb throughout the year. So the rut in California can be any time between July and December. The farther south you go, the more likely it is going to be towards July. And the farther north, the more likely it's going to be towards December. So it's a latitudinal gradient. And then because the rut is on such a wide range, when lambs come is also on that very wide range, where lambs can drop anytime between December and May. In very sometimes circumstances, they can actually drop as late as September. We haven't proven it, but we're pretty sure that there are circumstances in the desert where one ewe can have 2 lambs on a really good year, back to back. So it's really pretty variable. The desert's a bit strange. And then ewes and rams live pretty separately throughout the year, but then they come together during the rut, of course. And rams generally have a wider distribution across the landscape than the ewes. The ewes will generally stick in steeper, rockier habitat, generally because they're more worried about predation, both for themselves and for their lambs. They're smaller than the rams, so this makes sense. And then I just wanted to get into a little bit about the history of hunting of bighorn sheep in California. In 1872, the first hunting seasons were established for elk, pronghorn, and deer. And then in 1876, bighorn sheep were added to the list of game species and a season was established. But then 2 years later, just 2 years later, there was a moratorium on elk, pronghorn, bighorn sheep, and female deer harvest. I think because there was just such unbelievable levels of hunting that suddenly everyone was like, oh my God, their numbers are tanking. This is not good. And then also, I think that that wave, especially for sheep, of disease brought in by the domestic sheep was also having a pretty massive impact. Probably that even had more impact than hunting, really. And then on 1883, the moratorium on bighorn sheep hunting was extended. In 1933, bighorn sheep were given the status of a fully protected species. And so this is just a quote from one of the top bighorn researchers in California. He says that the concept of total protection was likely founded on two false assumptions: that overhunting was the primary problem, and that recolonization of vacant habitats would quickly follow recovery of those protected lands. So there was this whole idea of let's protect them and they will bounce back. But unfortunately, I think that pretty much is what happened, is that disease problem has been such a large issue that, you know, just stopping the hunting didn't really solve the problem. And so since then, there were some efforts to try to establish open hunt seasons and to establish bighorn sheep as a game animal. You know, that's over the course of like 50 years, 1922 to 1968. In 1968, there was funding for the first statewide survey of bighorn sheep by one of the premier biologists, Dick Weaver. And then in 1982, another attempt at a hunt season was made, but was defeated. But that effort caused the legislature to provide funding to allow the Department of Fish and Wildlife to study more about the species and about the distribution and to get population estimates. And so from that funding, in 1986, a season was finally declared. There were game laws, a season was established. And so then in 1987 was the first hunt season for desert bighorn sheep since 1878. So for 109 years, there was no bighorn sheep hunting in California. So all bighorn sheep in California are still afforded that fully protected status. That means that the only sheep in California that are allowed to be taken or even possessed are for research, recovery efforts, or where the managed plan allows for hunting. And right now there are 10 hunt zones that are open for limited take of desert bighorn sheep. And the quotas allow for no more than 15% take of mature rams within a population. And so this last year, this hunt season that's still going on, but is going to end in a few weeks, is the 37th year of bighorn sheep hunting in California. And here's just a little map of the 10 hunt zones that are currently. I suspect that you guys will have a lot of questions about which zone is the best one to apply for. And I'm happy to answer those questions. And just here's a little graphic of hunting success. This is from last hunt season because this year's hunt season is still ongoing. As you can see, we have a pretty successful program. Very few hunt tags, sorry about that. But overall, people that get a hunt tag are successful. We had a couple hunters last year that got a tag and didn't go hunting. That was a bit strange. The one thing that I will point out is if you notice the White Mountains, that one, only 3 out of 6 hunters got their tag. So that is a 50% success rate, whereas pretty much all the other ones are 100%. This last year was especially rough for the White Mountain hunters. We only had 1 out of the 6 successfully get a sheep. They also had, yeah, just really bad weather. The hunt season is about a month long, and they had a massive storm go through every single weekend, including Hurricane Hilary, which you can't really be on the top of the White Mountains at 14,000 feet during a massive storm. So the weather was not cooperating at all for those hunters.
Just on that note, Danielle, a few
Yeah.
years ago, I did a horse patrol into the White Mountains for bighorn sheep. And yeah, there's another reason why hunter success is sometimes low. That country works you over. I
Oh
think
yeah.
my horses were like, when are we going home?
Yeah, it is, I think, the hardest hunt that I know of in the Western US. It is not easy. I do not take it lightly if you apply for that one.
Right.
And so Eric just asked me to talk a little bit about how you could possibly get involved in bighorn sheep conservation and management in the state of California. There's 3 organizations that are really the organizations that you can do this with: the Sierra Nevada Bighorn Sheep Foundation, the California section of the Wild Sheep Foundation, and the Society for the Conservation of Bighorn Sheep. And so the Sierra Nevada Bighorn Sheep Foundation is really focused on that critically endangered subspecies. You know, they're really like, we need to get the numbers up. That is our #1 goal. So it's a very science-focused organization. It's also very outreach-focused, trying to bring awareness to the plight of these sheep. We wish we could give the sheep avalanche training, but they haven't listened to us yet. And then there's the Society for the Conservation of Bighorn Sheep. This is a really great on-the-ground organization that works across the desert to make sure that there is enough water for wildlife. And so they help install and maintain these artificial water sources that the sheep really do use. They really do depend on them. The water in the desert has decreased in quantity of springs, and also like the amount of water flowing out in each spring over the last 50 years has been pretty well documented. So this type of work really does help mitigate that impact. And then lastly, the California section of the Wild Sheep Foundation. The Wild Sheep Foundation is really the big premier wild sheep foundation in North America, if not the world. And so this is the California section of that larger foundation. And they, yeah, are really a great organization to be involved in. They're involved in every aspect of wild sheep work in California. And just to give them a little shout out, they're going to have their annual banquet fundraiser in Sacramento on April 27th, if you have any interest. And that is my presentation. I would look forward to answering your questions.
Awesome, Danielle. Really good job.
Thank you.
So there were some questions that came in, and it sounds like there's a person that's regularly seen bighorns at Lake Mojave on the California side. He's asking what species they are.
Yeah, those would be desert bighorn sheep.
Okay.
Desert
Excellent.
bighorn sheep proper. Yep.
And then a question about fertility period for the ewes. Did you already address that and I was sleeping?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's, I mean, the rut is
Yeah.
when everyone it is a really good question. I don't know off the top of my head if the ewes, my guess is the ewes do have some sort of cycle where they're more likely to get pregnant during the rut. But I think that they can get pregnant year round. because of what I was saying about every once in a while we do see circumstances where it seems like a ewe has had multiple lambs in a single year. So I think there still needs to be more research on that for me to answer it as thoroughly as you want.
Yeah. So why does the rut vary so much from, I think you were saying from July till
Yeah,
late fall, even winter?
yeah,
Why does it vary so much?
yeah. Um, so there's two parts of that about how I've heard that explained. One is, of course, there's that latitudinal gradient. So it's all about timing of when the lambs will drop that is best for the lambs. And so in the White Mountains, for example, up in Bishop, it's snowy and cold up there. You do not want lambs to be dropping in December. They would not survive. And so the lambs there are on a very set schedule where they drop April, May, right in there, right where the forage is coming out. It's spring. It's going to be great. And then in the desert down south, there's the most precipitation in the year is in the winter there. And so there's really good forage in the winter. So you would think that you would want the lambs to drop in about December, January, when there's really good forage. And so there is that whole latitudinal thing. And then I've also heard people talk about how the desert is a relatively mild climate. And so that might relax the whole very stringent seasonal sequence of rut, lambing, that whole seasonal cycle that is found in more like variable cold climates.
Yeah,
So yeah, there is that whole argument that maybe it's just a more mild climate and that they are able to have lambs throughout the year more.
awesome. So I'm seeing a ton of questions come in on chat and then some on the Q&A. So Danielle's going to be sticking around and she's going to be answering all those questions. My favorite one is, I think someone asked if you could guide their sheep hunt, Danielle. Is that an option?
Alas, it's not. I have access to the GPS data, so I think that would be cheating.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay. So I'm going to throw you one last question. So what is your most favorite part of your job, Danielle? What do you enjoy doing the very most?
Oh, that's a good question. Um, I really like my job in that, it's a very intensive job. I am working a lot. I'm working all the time, but I get to work with a really great group of people and I get paid to hike sometimes, which I'm not going to complain about. Uh, but really I get to go outdoors and I get to have a lot of time to just be in the field and to talk with my colleagues and to see sheep and to see, whatever else is out there. And also I get to meet a lot of really, really passionate people, which is always a really good thing to have.
Absolutely. So go ahead and stop sharing your screen. And while we're getting that lined out, I just want to give a huge shout out to all of the volunteers from all the organizations Danielle talked about. So if you volunteer for one of those organizations, put that in the chat. And I want to thank you so much for doing that. Thank you for volunteering your time and partnering in conservation efforts. So I'm going to go ahead and share our screen. All right. Can you see that okay, Danielle?
Yep.
Awesome. Very good. Well, how's it going, Joe? It's good to
I'm
have
good,
you
Eric. How are
on.
you?
I'm doing
Yeah,
well.
thanks for having me. Thanks for
Thanks
having
so
me.
much for being here. I just want to introduce my friend Joe with all of you. Joe's a retired Nevada game warden. He's also a hunter education instructor, and we'll talk a little bit about that later and the role he played for my family. He's a bighorn sheep hunting guide. He grew up in Tonopah and has been poking around the sheep hunting woods for a long, long time. Joe's also a lifetime bighorn sheep hunter. How many tags have you actually drawn, Joe?
I've drawn two in Nevada and desert bighorn sheep tags, and then I drew a Nevada Rocky Mountain bighorn sheep tag.
Awesome.
Pretty fortunate, yeah.
Yeah. And he's also a Boone and Crockett and Pope and Young official measurer. And the way that I met Joe, that was years ago. I met him and we ended up coaching Little League together. And he's just a good team player. He ended up, like I said, he ended up teaching hunter education for two of my sons. And then when one of my sons ended up drawing a bighorn sheep tag, Joe ended up kind of taking us under his wing and mentoring us and our newbie. We've never even thought about ever being able to even draw a tag. And then when David drew a tag when he was 16 years old, we got a hold of Joe, and Joe mentored us. There's a lot of being talked about mentorship all throughout the hunter education community. There's actually books being that are written about mentorship. Well, Joe did that the old school way, and he had us over to his house and kind of did a mini bighorn sheep clinic where he talked about how to hunt them, what to look for, and just super thankful to you, Joe, for doing that. And without
It was my
you
pleasure,
helping us, without you helping us, this would have never happened the way it did. So, huge team player. So we're going to kind of start this portion of the webinar and kind of a friendly competition. So you'll see Davy's ram, my son's ram, off to the left, and then this ram that one of Joe's clients killed. We're going to call that Parks ram. So just kind of, if you're into judging sheep, it can be super challenging. Kind of put it in the Q&A what you think these rams score. And the closest one will win a really cool prize. Maybe a bighorn sheep hunt, or maybe not. Maybe more like a hunter ed hat, something like that. So put that in the Q&A, put your name in there, and then maybe you can kind of guesstimate what these sheep scored. So Joe, what do you enjoy very most about bighorn sheep hunting? What's the big deal about it? Why do so many people enjoy it?
Well, most people, Eric, are lucky to draw a tag in the beginning. People wait a lifetime to draw a tag, and so if you're just a normal guy, when you draw a desert bighorn sheep tag or any sheep tag, it is just the most exciting thing you could do. The country that they live in is so arid and remote, and you just think that how could something survive in such a desolate community and environment, and just watching them navigate the terrain that they maneuver through, the cliffs and the rock shell slides, and it's just amazing to be out there with them. I don't know what else to say unless you've really experienced it.
Yeah, it's really true. You look at their terrain and their country, and at least for us, it amazed us that anything could live there. And yet they're not only living there, but they're thriving there. And I thought it was just to see, it's just fascinating how they could thrive in such rugged country. So tell us about a memorable hunt that you've been on. These are some cool pictures.
Well, I guarantee you, every sheep hunt that I've been on, I grew up in Nevada, born and raised in Nevada, and most of the sheep hunting that I've done has been in Nevada, and all through draw tags and then guiding some special tags. But everyone's memorable, and enjoying it with lots of friends and family, because when you draw a tag, you're going to have people with you in the field because it is a special hunt. Many are memorable. My dad, I drew 2 bighorn sheep tags, desert bighorn sheep tags in Nevada. My first one in 1980 when I was 14 years old. And my dad, born and raised here in Nevada, had still yet to draw a tag, and he finally drew a tag when he was in his 70s. So it's just a matter, he had max points forever. And it's just truly the luck of the draw when it comes down to certain things. Some people are luckier and some people aren't. But probably the most exciting and memorable hunt for me was this ram right here. This ram Parks killed, and we were hunting in Nevada, and we had found this ram scouting, and he was coming out, and Parks was from Washington, D.C. And he came out and he told us he did not want to kill a ram the first day. He wanted to have the experience, and we assured him that he would have an experience, but that he really needed to consider killing this ram because it really was a once in a lifetime ram. And so we talked him into it after we spotted him that morning. And Parks and I were making the stalk on this ram, and we had to walk about 2.5 miles to get to the base of the mountain and then start our trudge up the mountain. And our spotters were back at the truck, and all of a sudden I see 2 Black Hawk helicopters circling us. And these helicopters just kept circling lower and lower and lower. And this ram was getting very nervous. And then all of a sudden, one helicopter landed at the trucks where our spotters were, and the other one kept circling. And well, this ram is now starting to get out of the country, and our guys are waving him like, get the heck out of here. And these guys landed, and here they are, military helicopters. And they said, well, we've never seen anybody in this part of the desert before, and we just thought you were stranded. You were waving at us, and they were saying, well, we were just trying to get you to get out of here. And so when we said no, that we were sheep hunting, they apologized and took off. But in the amongst of that, this ram started to work his way up to this nasty canyon, and because just the constant circling of those Black Hawk helicopters spooked him. But we kept after him, and Parks ended up getting a shot at this ram that afternoon. And unfortunately, it was a really steep uphill shot. The shot was a good shot, but it was about 300 yards, and he shot low and missed the ram, and the ram walked over the top of the hill. The good Lord was looking after us, and the next day we were able to pick the ram up, and he ended up getting him killed the next morning. But I mean, having 2 helicopters start circling you when you're sheep hunting, it's not a very good situation when you're on a ram of a lifetime, for sure.
Yeah, super memorable.
Absolutely.
So say you drew a tag. Now what? What are you thinking, Joe? You thinking guided, do it yourself? What kind of goes into making that decision?
Well, I honestly think it's totally about the individual themselves, and how much help they were going to have, how familiar they are with the hunting area that they drew, their means financially. There's so much to take into consideration. A lot of the times, at least for draw tag situations, you have to have help, and you have to have the ability to scout. A lot of the scouting takes place in the summertime, and when their sheep are tied to water a little bit more. But I think it just totally depends on your means. If you don't have the help, I would definitely, and you don't know the area, and maybe you've never hunted sheep before, I mean, I would maybe look into hiring a guide. If I had help from friends and family, and I was capable of getting around, and I had the optics and everything that I needed to be effective in my hunting, then I would do it myself. So I just really think it depends on the person, their abilities, and their financial means.
Right. And so how do you determine what kind of ram you're after?
I think that when you draw a tag, and I'm sure most people that when they apply for a tag in a unit, that they're going to do their due diligence and do research on the type of rams that have been killed in those areas during recent years, and and look at the checkout summaries or talk to people that have maybe hunted in previous years, and make that determination based on that. There's lots of sheep units that a mature ram could be, 8-9-year-old ram, and no matter what the genetics in that area, he's going to be a 150-inch ram or 145-inch ram, but he's going to be an 8 or 9-year-old ram, which is a good ram for that unit. And then there's other areas where they're genetically, they have the genetics where they grow big, where you could get maybe a 6-year-old ram that could be a 170-inch ram. And so I just think it depends on the unit that you draw and the information that you have regarding genetics and the age classification and age structures of those sheep in that unit.
Yeah, makes a ton of sense. So the next couple slides we'll go over kind of sheep hunting preparation. So let's talk physical preparation, Joe. Everybody talks about being in sheep shape, and tell us about how physical preparation comes into play on a sheep hunt.
Well, for sure that you want to be, if you want to have an enjoyable hunt, you need to be as physical as you can prior to the hunt, as far as getting into shape. Whether you're lifting weights, but cardio and just putting that pack on and taking a hike and getting used to the mountain, getting used to wearing boots and in that rough terrain. People will sometimes, exercise and do weightlifting and treadmill work, but when you actually put your boots on and get in that rough country, it's a different game. And you can be in good shape, and if your feet aren't in good shape and you don't have the good quality boots and hunting gear, you're not going to have a good hunt. And so I think physical preparation is crucial for having a good hunt, for sure. So
yeah, I think you hit on something really fundamental, just the whole idea of getting after it with a pack in tough terrain. That's a lot different than running a treadmill. And as you can see in this picture, you just working your ankles over, working muscles that you probably would never work on a treadmill.
For sure. Absolutely.
So this is your sheep hunting gear, Joe, and I'm sure there's more to it. Tell us a little bit about what you use and why you use it.
Well, optics are for me are a key part of my gear, based on your means and stuff like that. You need to have a good quality pair of binoculars, a good spotting scope at the very least, when you draw a sheep tag and hunt. People have a pair of 10-power binoculars and they have a spotting scope, and hand holding a pair of 10-power binoculars is one thing. But even if you were to put that set of 10-power binoculars on a tripod, you're going to pick up more definition, more detail when you're scanning that country. There's way more guys out there that are way more knowledgeable about sheep and sheep hunting than me. You just happen to know me, Eric. But optics play a key role. And I have a pair of 15-power binoculars. I have a pair of those big eyes, which are 40-power wide-angle binoculars, which I use from the truck. If I'm scouting, I will pack those on the mountain. But those 40-power binoculars, I look from 5-6 miles away. And the 15-power binoculars, I look from a couple miles away. And then, I have the spotting scope, which I pack, in my backpack. But when I go on the mountain, I usually pack the spotting scope and my 15-power binoculars in a good tripod. But, using trail cameras, if it's legal in your state, and during the summertime when those sheep are hitting water, it'll give you an idea of what rams are in those units that you have the possibility of harvesting. Not to say that rams move in and out of certain areas based on rutting activity and stuff like that. Some rams may come over into one unit to rut and go back into another unit to winter or post rut or pre rut. And so those trail cameras give you an idea of just what might be in the area. again, having good quality boots, having good quality walking sticks and backpacks based on what kind of hunting you're going to be doing. As far as if you have multiple people, obviously you don't need a bigger pack, but you want to be able to pack out, have a pack that's capable of packing what gear. If you have to pack out meat, head, cape, and stuff like that, you just have to be able to take care of that. I always carry an inReach satellite messenger because I'm usually in the hills by myself scouting or something, and so my wife likes to track me when I'm out, and so it's a good tool. And I got a tripod in there, a stool, range finding binoculars. I mean, there's a lot of things that a guy needs, but at the very least, you need a good pair of binoculars and a spotting scope tripod for both, that you could use both on the tripod.
Makes a lot of sense. And and then I'm noticing you've got the walking sticks. Do you usually bring those?
Always. Yeah. I have walking sticks with me always, depending on the terrain. You may use one or two, but they're very critical. A lot of guys use walking sticks, to actually help too when you're in steep country. And say you just see a sheep or you want to look at something, quickly, and you're hiking, your heart's beating and you're breathing hard, but even just resting your binoculars on your walking stick will steady that up to where you can get a better look at what you're looking at. So they come in handy for variable, reasons and stuff like that, but I always have them.
Yeah. So talk to us about rifles, Joe. What would you recommend for a rifle? Maybe not caliber per se, but what are you looking for in a sheep hunting rifle?
I personally like a gun that's flat shooting, and whether it's like a 6mm, 6.5 Creedmoor, it doesn't really matter the caliber. Most people will there's so many new calibers with the 6.5 PRC, 300 PRC, but any traditional cartridge from a 30-06 to a 270 6.5 Creedmoor will work fine. The most important thing is how to use it and using it using it the way it should be used, and being proficient with the use of that firearm. Unfortunately, we have times where we run into people that when they're hunting, that they buy a fancy rifle and it's a 1,000-yard gun and they don't know how to use their equipment, and they use the parallax adjustment to adjust it to 600 yards when they should use their turret. Anyways, you just need to be proficient and practice. And the thing is that you need to have a good quality bipod. You're not always going to be able to shoot prone. You may be having to shoot sitting from a rock pile. You need to have a good rest and stuff like that. But the main thing is being proficient, and just don't shoot from a bench. Go shoot from a rock pile. Go shoot from those positions that are going to be most likely the type of position that you're going to be in when you harvest a desert bighorn sheep.
Yeah. So how far does a hunter need to be able to accurately shoot?
Again, that's a hunter's preference.
Yeah.
I mean, nowadays, different magazines and just shows are always talking long range this and long range that. And the bottom line is that I always have somebody shoot what they're capable of shooting. And if they can't shoot that distance that they tell me comfortably, they're not going to shoot that far. I've been on hunts where guys have made a longer type shot, 400 or 500 yards, and made an ethical shot, one shot kill. I've had other guys that want to try to get close in sheep country, and which can be, it's doable, but they'll want to try to get 100 or 200 yards. Well, in that rough country, sheep have fantastic eyes, and if they do see you and you spook them because you're above them, or just little different things, then those rams will ball up. Then you make in my opinion, you make a more unethical shot trying to shoot 100 yards per se, because that ram's now running and balled up with a bunch of different rams. And so, you know, it all depends on the hunter, but most importantly, to practice and from every type of shooting position in rough terrain.
Yeah. Tell us about how you normally scout for a bighorn sheep hunt.
Well, if I would have had a tag and the tags that I've been a part of and hunting and stuff like that, I always try to set up, you know, cameras in the summertime when it's legal on the water sources. It gives you an idea of the type of rams that are in the unit. Like I said, there's a lot of times where rams move in and move out of a unit, but it gives you an idea, you know. But besides trail cameras, I spend a ton of time behind the glass. And I really believe that glassing at long distances, once you get proficient doing that, is very beneficial. The country is rough. A lot of times the country that I can cover with my optics far outweighs what I could cover on my feet in a day. But obviously it's sheep hunting. There's going to be nooks and cranny around every corner. And in order to look at that, you're going to have to hike it. And so it's not that you're going to be able to just do it strictly with glass or strictly hiking. I think you have to do what you can do based on the tools that are at our disposal these days.
Yeah. So give us some just really super practical glassing tips. Like how far are you glassing? How long are you staying in an area? And I remember one of the tips you gave us prior to our hunt is be patient. Kept on telling us, don't leave this area. It's super broken terrain, and eventually you're going to have sheep show up. And we sat there, Joe, and shivered for about 2 hours without seeing any sheep. And then finally, my son says, I've got sheep. And he ended up finding the rams in that band, and he ended up shooting one of the bigger ones out of that band. And so, yeah, tell us about just practical glassing tips.
Well, I mean, sometimes, I mean, again, it depends on your what kind of optics you do have available to you. You know, Swarovski's making great optics now with the BTX, the dual eyepiece spotting scope, and just spotting scopes. But like in these pictures here on the screen, we're looking at several miles to the mountain. Basically, that was the closest road that you could get to the mountain. And we generally glass, and most people that I know that hunt a lot and glass effectively, grid the area out, you know, up and down and horizontally and vertically, and do it in a grid pattern. And you know, you move your optics and you stop and you take your hands off your optics so there's no shake. And then you don't move your optics, you move your eyes. So you're always moving your eyes within the glass, and then you move your optics and set up again, and you do it over and over and over again. And like I say, this terrain that the sheep inhabit is so broken up. A ram could be laying down and you might just see a top of his horn. And if you don't train your eye for picking up those details as far as just a tip of a horn or the top of a horn or a muzzle or something, you know, it takes a lot of years of experience and just getting out there and practice. And that's why scouting is so important.
Yeah. So do you lean to be on the patient side, Joe, or are you wanting to scramble and find a new glassing spot?
So I hunt with a lot of guys, and I tend to be on the more patient side of glassing, but I'm definitely not afraid to put the boots on the ground when it needs to get done. But I'm fortunate that I have good quality optics, and I know that you know, when I was much younger and stuff like that, I didn't have good optics. I had a cheap spotting scope and a cheap pair of 10 power binoculars. And as I got older and the kids grew up and got out of the house, it allowed me a few more luxuries as far as the quality of optics. And I know that when I went from a pair of hand holding 10 power binoculars to putting a pair of 10 power binoculars on a tripod, it's like, man, this is like night and day. Yes. And then years went by, and then I got a pair of 15 power binoculars, and it's like, wow, these are like night and day compared to the 10s. And I mean, and then when you go to like those 40, those big eyes, you know, Koa makes a set, Dr. Optics makes a set. There's a bunch of people out there that are making them, but it's just like amazing the difference in the animals that you find with the quality of optics that you have at your disposal. So,
Yeah.
you know, pan, you know, horizontally, vertically, and then just keep that. If you don't see it, then move to a different, you know, an area and keep looking, you know.
I think we're spending a lot of time on this, but for good reason. I think just something that's helped us and our family and people that I've hunted with is to hunt with and be glassing with buddies. Do you think? I think that makes such a huge difference, not only for my patience level and to be able to sit there for a while and know that maybe when you're missing something, maybe a buddy, or in my case, a son was able to pick something out that I wasn't able to. How much does that play into your hunts?
You know, the more the merrier. I mean, as far as, I mean, I do a lot by myself, but it's always more enjoyable when you're doing with somebody else, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
So let's talk about like hunting tactics. And so you got a ram spotted. I think this is the coolest picture that you sent me. Tell us first about the picture and then maybe some stalking tips.
you know, I mean, everybody hunts a little bit different, and it always depends on the terrain, obviously. But I was set up on this ram, and this is actually a photo video taken through my spotting scope, and I was about 1,500 yards away from this ram, videotaping this ram, and this was our hunter on the left that's laid down prone, and our other guide, the owner of the outfitting business, and they actually crawled into my view when I was videotaping this ram that was in this picture. And this ram is still, from their location, was still 400 yards away. It doesn't look like it in this video, but to me, it looked like when I was looking through the spotting scope that they're right on top of them. But when they ended up shooting this ram, and I hiked down to him, and I said, "Man, you were right on top of that ram." And they go, "No, we weren't. He was like 380 yards." And but it looked a lot different. But to me, I mean, I try to use the terrain to my advantage. Sheep are very curious animals. They have excellent eyesight. And if, you know, I always just try to stay out of sight. I always, with anything, use the wind in your advantage. But if I had to cross any kind of open terrain where the sheep or the ram's going to see me, I always try to come from below them. They seem to be a little bit more forgiving with something that's below them versus something that's above them. And I think that that's more a predator-prey relationship. I mean, I think that, you know, desert sheep have to deal with lions a lot for predation. And, you know, most of those attacks may come at water from behind or, you know, in the mountains. But so I like coming from the bottom, or, you know, if up another drainage, coming in horizontal. Coming in from above, for me, from my experience, is a last resort type of a thing. But I just don't like coming from above personally.
Yeah, gotcha. And then how about making the shot when it counts? You talk about the need for a solid rest, and how important is it to have a good spotter with you, someone that's actually, and you're communicating with right before you take that shot?
Well, I think they're always going to, more than anything, they're going to be, you know, helping you identify the right ram. I mean, sometimes people that aren't in the, you know, that don't hunt a lot, or if this is their only sheep tag that they ever had, the spotter is very helpful in helping that person identify which ram they're going to kill, and making sure they're on the right target, and letting them know when the best opportunity is for them to shoot, so they're not you know, taking a bad shot, or you know, something that's unsafe. But you know, laying down prone is obviously the best way you can shoot. Having a good rest with a bipod, and then something at the back and the butt of your gun, whether it's a pad, a coat, a shooting bag or whatever. But in this picture, I mean, even this lady here, she has a bipod that's able to go from 2 feet to where she could sit down comfortably and shoot to laying prone. And I mean, I use that Hatch Out West bipod. It's a great bipod. It can go in lots of different situations, and a lot of times you're in a spot where you can't lay prone, and you may have to have one leg that's only extended 6 inches, and the other one's got to be extended 2 feet. So I've used my backpack for a rest. Standing up vertically to where if you're sitting, that hard frame backpack will help you rest the butt of your gun. So there's lots of things to do, but you definitely need a solid rest.
Yeah. So what are some common mistakes that you've seen sheep hunters consistently make, and what do we need to avoid when we're sheep hunting so this doesn't happen to you?
I think a lot of the mistakes that people make probably are, they maybe try to get too close in rough terrain and the sheep spook them, and which is not a big deal. I mean, it happens all the time, but what the inexperienced person will try to force a shot then. And generally speaking, those rams will bunch up and make your shot very difficult, very dangerous. And when tomorrow's another day, you got more daylight in the afternoon, you go find them and relocate them again and do it all over again. But probably, probably rushing a bad shot, I would say, because it is, you got a lot of pressure on you. It's a once in a lifetime tag. It may be a really big ram, or you might think it's the only opportunity you're going to have because you just worked your tail end off to get up here, and you don't know if you could do it again tomorrow. And and so I think people make a bad mistakes like that. So
let's talk a little bit about after the shot. Care for the meat, care for the cape. What do you normally do, Joe? Are you usually on the majority of the kills? Are you doing like a shoulder mount, or are you doing a life size? Are people wanting a life size mount? What are you usually doing?
It honestly just depends on the person. I mean, I've seen guys that kill a beautiful ram and they're just going to put a European mount on. Getting the cape off the animal, we usually do a dorsal cut like you see in the photo there, and then just peel it down, and it takes some time. We then based on whether how much help you have. They're very small animals. I mean, they're not very big. The head and the cape probably weigh as much as almost the meat, maybe exaggerating a little bit, but they're not very big. And two guys could easily pack out a boned out ram and the head and cape and their gear and get it taken care of. Especially if you bone it out and take the back straps, tenderloins, and stuff like that. But keep it, clean, cool, and dry, like the hunter safety guys say. Right?
What are the keys to taking good photos?
Well, I have friends that take phenomenal photos, and I try to take good photos. But all I can say, take a lot of photos, and you might get one good one. And so it is a hunt of a lifetime. You have time. Just take the photos, review the photos. If it's not what you want, set it up and do it again. You have time. Generally, most of the sheep hunting's in the fall. It's cool enough where you're not worried about spoilage or anything like that. And just get what you want and take pictures during the hunt. Packing in, packing out, scenery fit pictures. But just take a lot of them because you're not going to replace that moment. And you want to be able to replace it when you get older for sure.
Yeah. So we're kind of winding down on time. Any final thoughts on this, Joe? For our hunt, it was like, I didn't think we would ever get a chance to do this, and yet it happened. And I guess my takeaway is if guys like us can do it, just regular people. So let's get back to that, our friendly competition. So what did Parks Ram score, Joe?
Parks Ram was 184 and 5/8.
Okay. And then Davies Ram was 164 and something. So a big, huge difference between. I'm going to sign off. Danielle, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Eric.
All right. Take care.
Take care.